All right, get ready, because this deep dive, well, I think that
Oh, yeah.
we're going to be looking at this through the lens of the Venus Lux show. Venus Lux, she's an adult film actress, and she has her friend Joe on, and they have this really fascinating conversation. You might think, wait, adult film industry? What's that got to do with me?
Right.
But stick with us, trust me. This discussion goes way beyond, just that industry. They get into some pretty universal truths. We're talking personality development, relationships, how we see ourselves, the whole shebang.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's amazing how one conversation
Uh,
can open up such a complex topic.
yeah.
Like Venus and Joe, they give us this little window into how, like, cultural norms, tough relationships, even just the pressures of the industry they're in can actually shape a dominant personality.
And Venus's story, it's really something. She talks about growing up in like a traditional Asian family. Think about it, an environment where obedience and responsibility, those are like huge deals, It's how you're raised.
Yeah, that kind of environment can definitely have a big impact on someone's personality, especially early on. I
Yeah.
mean, just think about it. If from when you're a kid, you're always told to, fulfill family expectations,
Right.
stick to these strict societal norms,
Right.
you might learn to just kind of like suppress your own desires and your own opinions. It's almost like encouraging you to blend in instead of stand out.
Right. You don't want to rock the boat. Just keep your head down and meet those expectations.
Exactly.
It's almost like a survival strategy in a way, right?
Right, exactly. And then she goes on to talk about this relationship, a really difficult one that she calls abusive.
I can only imagine, how an experience like that could just totally change your view of the world.
I mean, it just has to, right?
Yeah. Trauma, especially when it's in a relationship, it can be a catalyst for some pretty big personality shifts. It makes sense, actually, if you think about it from like a psychological point of view.
Yeah. When someone's abused, they often develop this stronger, more assertive personality as a way to protect themselves. It's like a defense mechanism that kicks in saying, hey, I'm not going to be a victim again.
It's like, all right, I need to like put up a shield or something.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
in a way, is that what her dominant personality is? Like a shield? A way to make sure she's not going to get hurt again.
I think you hit the nail on the head. And that's actually what she says, too. She connects her dominance directly to survival, to self-preservation. She even uses this term Darwinism to describe it,
Oh, wow.
which might sound a bit, harsh at first. But she's basically applying that survival of the fittest idea to her own life,
Oh, okay.
especially in the adult film industry, which can be, well, demanding, judgmental, even exploitative.
So she's saying she has to be strong and assertive, maybe even a bit ruthless to make it in that world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She's faced situations that have forced her to develop those traits, just to navigate everything. But this whole vulnerability thing, this need to protect yourself, but it's not unique to Venus. I mean, we all have our own stories, our own histories that shape how we deal with the world.
It's like everyone develops their own kind of armor in a way, right? But her friend Joe, he brings a really interesting perspective to all this. He's like, hey, don't make assumptions about transgender women. Like see beyond the stereotypes.
I thought that was such an important part of their conversation. Joe reminds us that every single person, no matter who they are,
Yeah.
has their own unique story, their own emotional baggage. And he's saying, approach every relationship with understanding. Don't just fall into those preconceived notions.
Yeah. And that advice he gives about, understanding your partner's emotional state, being patient, that struck me as something that applies to any relationship, not just, the ones he's talking about. Would you agree?
100%. It's about going beyond those surface level judgments and actually connecting with someone on a deeper level, like a human level.
Yeah, exactly. But then Venus throws us a curveball. She admits that she actually enjoys giving up control, but only to someone she really trusts. I gotta admit, that surprised me. For someone who identifies as dominant, wouldn't that seem, I don't know, kind of contradictory?
Yeah, you'd think so, right?
Yeah,
If you're someone who thrives on being in control, why would you willingly give that up? It seems almost, well, paradoxical.
it does.
But if you dig a little deeper into the whole psychology of dominance, it actually makes sense. Remember we were talking about how dominance can be a way to protect yourself, right? Like a defense mechanism.
Right, that shield.
Exactly. But being in control all the time,
Yeah.
always having those walls up, that can be incredibly exhausting. It takes a toll.
You're always on edge.
Yeah, like you're in constant fight or flight mode. So for Venus, this whole idea of wanting a protege, that's what she calls it, it might be her way of finding some balance. Maybe it's about sharing that burden of control with someone she feels safe with.
Someone to, like, share that weight with.
Exactly. Imagine having someone, a confidant, who really gets you, who understands all your complexities. It allows you to let go of that need to always be the strong one.
So it's not about giving up control completely, but choosing to share it with someone she totally trusts, right? Like
Yeah.
someone who can actually give her that sense of security and let her be, well, vulnerable in a way she might not be with other people.
That's a great way to put it. And it shows us that even people who seem super dominant, they might still crave those moments of surrender, those moments of trust. It speaks of how complex we all are as humans, right?
Yeah, like we're not just one thing or another.
Exactly. We all have these different sides to us.
Okay, so we've got Venus and her take on being dominant, but I'm curious what Joe has to say, especially about his advice for men who are dating transgender women.
Yeah, he gets pretty specific there.
He does.
He boils it down to three things: empathy, patience, and recognizing that everyone's different, like really different.
It seems like he's saying treat all women with respect and understanding no matter what, right? And he's really pushing this idea of understanding the unique challenges and experiences that a transgender woman might face.
Absolutely. And he uses this interesting comparison. He compares it to dating a teenager going through adolescence. Like, think about all those mood swings, the insecurities. He's saying you need that same kind of patience and understanding.
It's a good point, actually.
Right. He's highlighting that empathy and compassion are just essential in any relationship. If we can recognize that everyone has their own journey, their own emotional baggage, that's how we create a real connection.
That's a powerful message, for sure. And like we were saying earlier, I think it goes way beyond just dating transgender women. It's about how we should approach all relationships, no matter who they are.
It really is. It's about connecting on a human level, seeing each other as, well, human.
Now, Venus's story, it really makes you think about dominance. Is it something we're born with? Like, is it hardwired into our personalities? Or is it something that happens because of what we go through in life, the challenges we face?
That's the big question, isn't it? Nature versus nurture. And Venus's story suggests that it might be a bit of both.
Oh, okay.
Like, we all come into the world with certain tendencies,
Right.
but our experiences, they can amplify those tendencies or they can diminish them. It's all about how we interact with the world around us.
Okay, so she's got this background that emphasized obedience, but then she kind of had to develop this assertive side to deal with some tough situations.
Exactly. It's like we have a blueprint, but life throws in these curveballs that can reshape the final product.
So we've talked about Venus's upbringing, that abusive relationship, but there's another big influence we got to consider, right? Her career, the adult film industry. How does that play into all this?
Yeah, that's a key piece of the puzzle. That industry, it often reinforces those traditional power dynamics we see in society, women in submissive roles, all that.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And Venus, she kind of flips that script, doesn't she? She's known for being dominant on screen.
Yeah.
It's like she's taking back that power, using it as a way to express herself.
It's almost like a statement.
Right. It's
Yeah.
an interesting contrast, and it shows how resilient she is, how much she wants to control her own narrative.
And she's very open about how being in that industry has made her even more guarded, even more assertive.
Yeah.
She's always getting unwanted attention requests. It's like she's had to build up these walls to feel safe, to stay in control in a world that can feel incredibly, invasive.
You can't blame her. Think about all the scrutiny, the objectification she faces.
Yeah.
Building those walls, it can be a way to protect herself from getting hurt emotionally. But she also points out how those same walls, the ones that keep out the bad stuff, they might also stop her from connecting with people in a real way.
Yeah, they can be isolating.
It's a double-edged sword, just like dominance itself, right?
Yeah.
It can empower you, protect you, but it can also create a barrier to intimacy, to letting people in.
So after all this, what have we learned about dominant personalities? Like, what are the key takeaways from Venus's experiences?
Well, one thing is clear, personality is complicated.
Yeah.
It's not black and white. There's so much more going on beneath the surface than what we might see at first.
You could just slap a label on someone and call it a day.
Right. We got to look deeper. Think about the motivations, the experiences, the vulnerabilities that are hidden beneath that outer shell of dominance.
And Venus's story, it shows us just how much our experiences, the good and the bad, shape who we become. It's like our past is always with us, influencing our present.
Absolutely. It's like we're always evolving, always adapting to whatever life throws at us.
Right.
And those adaptations, those coping mechanisms, they can show up in different ways, sometimes leading to a more, dominant personality.
So it's an ongoing process, this whole personality thing, right? And while dominance can be a powerful tool especially for protecting ourselves and achieving our goals, we got to be aware of the downsides too.
Exactly.
Like how it can sometimes make it hard to build real relationships or let ourselves be vulnerable.
Yeah. It's all about finding that balance,
Right.
recognizing both the strengths
Yeah.
and the limitations of who we are, and figuring out how to navigate all that in a way that feels authentic.
So we've talked about how those walls she's built, they can be protective, but they can also be isolating. But then there's this part where she talks about wanting a protege.
Things get really interesting there.
They do. It seems kind of strange, right? Someone who loves being in control, they want to hand over the reins to someone else. But like we said, dominance isn't always so straightforward. There's often a lot more going on beneath the surface. So why do you think she's looking for someone she can, like, pass the torch to?
Well, remember how we were talking about dominance as a defense mechanism?
Mm-hmm.
Always being in control, always on guard. That can be incredibly draining.
It's exhausting.
Exactly. So this whole protege idea, it could be her way of trying to balance that out. Maybe she's looking for a relationship where she can let go of some of that control, where she can actually feel safe and supported.
So it's not about giving up control altogether, but sharing it with someone she trusts completely, right?
Right. Someone who gives her that stability that allows her to let her guard down.
It's like she's looking for that sweet spot between wanting to be in control and wanting to let go and trust someone else.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that this whole protege thing suggests a level of self-awareness that you don't always see in people who identify as dominant. It's like she recognizes that her need for control, while it helped her in many ways, it can also be a burden.
It's like even the strongest people need someone to lean on sometimes.
That's a great way to put it. And maybe it's also about finding a relationship that challenges her, that helps her grow in ways she might not be able to on her own.
Now let's look at another part of Venus's story. Her experience in the adult film industry, especially as a transgender woman.
This is where we see how societal expectations, personal identity, and power dynamics all kind of clash in a very specific environment.
It's a whole different layer, right?
Yeah, it is. The adult film industry, it often reinforces those traditional gender roles and power structures. Women being portrayed in submissive roles, that kind of thing.
It plays into all those stereotypes.
Right. But Venus, she challenges those norms.
She does.
Remember how we were talking about her embracing that dominant persona?
Yeah.
It's almost like she's using that dominance to take back her power, to define herself on her own terms, even in an industry that can be very objectifying.
She's not letting the industry define her.
Exactly. And she's very honest about how being in that world has made her feel like she needs to protect herself even more.
I mean, it makes sense. She's constantly getting unwanted attention, propositions, judgments, not just for being a woman, but for being a transgender woman, too.
Yeah, that adds another layer of complexity to it.
It does. And it makes sense that she's had to build up even stronger defenses just to cope with that pressure and scrutiny.
Yeah. It's like she's had to create this fortress around herself.
Right.
To feel safe, to feel in control.
But she also talks about how that need for self-protection, it can be empowering, but it can also be isolating.
Exactly. It's like those walls, they keep out the bad stuff, but they can also make it hard to let people in.
Another double-edged sword.
It really is. And it makes you think about how societal expectations and these industry norms can clash with someone's personal identity, how it shapes who they become.
Venus is dealing with multiple layers of pressure and expectations.
Right.
It's not just about being a woman. It's about being a transgender woman in an industry that's not always known for being, well, accepting and respectful.
And yet she's found a way to thrive. She's asserted her power. She's defined her own version of success.
It's inspiring to see.
It really is. It shows us that it's possible to break free from those expectations, to create a life that feels true to yourself, even when the world around you is pushing back.
Now, I want to go back to something Joe said that really stuck with me. The importance of understanding your partner's emotional state.
Oh, that's so crucial.
It is. And he wasn't just talking about dating transgender women, right? This is something that applies to any relationship.
Absolutely. He's basically saying, be patient, be empathetic, especially when you're dating someone who's been through a lot. Like, really try to understand where they're coming from emotionally.
It's about putting yourself in their shoes.
Right. Because their experience might be totally different from yours.
And he makes this point that transgender women, just like everyone else, they're individuals. They have their own personalities, their own insecurities, their own desires. It's about seeing the person, not the label.
It's about recognizing that shared humanity that connects us all.
Wow, we've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive.
Mm.
Venus's personal story, her take on dominance, all these reflections on protection and connection. And then we've got Joe's perspective, about navigating relationships with empathy and understanding.
It's been a lot to unpack.
It has, but there's still so much more to explore.
Oh, yeah. We're just getting started. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll dig even deeper into the dynamics between Venus and Joe. We'll see how their personalities, their experiences, create this really unique and insightful dialogue about power, vulnerability, and that search for genuine connection.
So stick with us. We'll be right back with more fascinating insights and thought-provoking discussions about dominant personalities.
Back again for more of our deep dive into dominant personalities. We're still with Venus Lux and her friend Joe, right? Their conversation, it's just packed with insights about personality, relationships, how we connect as humans. Really fascinating stuff.
It's funny. The more we talk about this, the more I see Venus and Joe representing these two totally different ways of looking at relationships. Like, it's that classic debate. Are relationships transactions or genuine connections?
Yeah, that's a sharp observation. Especially in the beginning, Venus seems to see relationships through this very specific lens. It's all about power dynamics, who's in control, who's getting what out of it. And especially for her, how to avoid getting hurt or taken advantage of.
She even talks about her past relationships almost like they were business deals that went wrong. It's a very practical, almost cold way to think about something that's usually considered so emotional.
Well, think about what she's been through. The abuse, the exploitation. It's no wonder she's built up this protective shell. It's her way of dealing with the world, minimizing risk, maximizing control.
Right, so she doesn't get hurt again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that Darwinism thing she keeps mentioning, it just reinforces that whole idea. She's approaching relationships from a survival of the fittest perspective.
Like she's applying those same survival instincts to her love life.
Right? Protecting her heart like it's some precious resource. There's this psychological theory, attachment theory, that might explain some of this. It basically says that our early childhood experiences, especially with our parents or caregivers, they could really shape how we approach relationships later on.
Oh, interesting.
So if those early experiences were, let's say, inconsistent, maybe there was neglect or even abuse, it can lead to an insecure attachment style.
Yeah.
That can show up as a fear of intimacy, a need to be in control, or even seeing relationships as transactions.
So it's like those early experiences created this template for how she connects with people.
It's a possibility, yeah. But then we've got Joe on the other side offering a totally different perspective. He's all about empathy, patience, really understanding where your partner's coming from emotionally. It's a much more, compassionate approach, I guess.
Definitely. And what I find interesting is that he doesn't shy away from acknowledging that, dating transgender women, it might come with its own unique challenges, but he still emphasizes those core values: respect, communication, genuine connection.
Those are the fundamentals for him, regardless of gender identity or anything else. It's about recognizing our shared humanity.
And what I love is that Venus, even though she starts off kind of guarded, she's clearly intrigued by what Joe has to say.
Oh, you can tell.
She's asking questions, really listening. It's like his words are making her question her own approach to relationships.
It's a perfect example of how even those deeply held beliefs, those patterns we fall into, they can be challenged and even changed when we're open to different perspectives.
It's like someone's showing you a whole new way to look at things.
Exactly. And maybe for Venus, she's starting to see that there might be another way, a path to deeper intimacy and fulfillment without having to sacrifice her sense of security.
Which makes this whole protege thing even more interesting. It's like she's not just looking for someone to control, but someone who can help her break down those walls she's built around herself.
Right, someone to guide her toward a more authentic, more vulnerable way of connecting with someone.
It's like she's realizing that real strength isn't just about dominance or control, but having the courage to let go, to trust, to let yourself be seen and loved for who you really are.
That's powerful. It really challenges how we define strength. And, even though they're discussing some pretty serious stuff, Venus still brings in some humor,
Oh, yeah, she does.
It's like she uses humor to lighten the mood, to create this connection, even when they're talking about tough topics.
I noticed that too. It's like, hey, I can be strong and assertive, but I can also laugh at myself.
Exactly. And it's important to point out that her humor, it never feels mean or dismissive. It's playful, it's self-deprecating, and it creates this really warm, authentic vibe.
It adds a human touch to the overall conversation.
Yeah, and it's cool to see Joe's reaction too. He clearly appreciates her wit, her playfulness. You can sense this real camaraderie between them. It's like they're connecting on multiple levels, not just intellectually, but through shared laughter.
It's a good reminder that it's important to find partners who not only challenge us and support us, but who can also make us laugh.
It's so true. That shared sense of humor, that ability to find lightness in the middle of serious conversations, it can be incredibly bonding. It's often a sign of real compatibility.
Speaking of connection, I want to shift gears a bit and talk about Venus's thoughts on femininity. It's a really interesting part of their conversation because it gets into how complicated it can be to navigate womanhood as a transgender individual.
Yeah, that's a topic loaded with societal expectations and judgments.
For sure, there's all this pressure to fit into this very specific and often very narrow definition of what it means to be feminine.
And Venus is very open about the fact that she's had to figure out how to embrace her own femininity on her own terms. It's been a process of self-discovery, of challenging those preconceived notions, and deciding for herself what femininity means to her.
She talks about that pressure to conform, to meet certain standards, but she also talks about the power of finding your own unique expression.
It's a powerful message for anyone who's ever felt like they have to fit into some predefined box. Venus is showing us that femininity, like any other part of our identity, it's not fixed. It's fluid, it's dynamic, and it's always evolving.
It's about finding what feels authentic to you, regardless of what society says you should be.
Exactly. And, going back to what Joe was saying earlier, that emphasis on patience in relationships, that really resonated with me.
That's such important advice, and it's easy to forget.
It is. He's saying be understanding, be supportive, especially when you're with someone who's going through major life changes or challenges.
He really stresses the importance of seeing things from your partner's point of view.
Right. Their emotional landscape might be completely different from yours.
And he even compares it to, get this, dating a teenager going through adolescence, all those mood swings, insecurities. You need that extra patience and understanding.
It's such a great analogy. We all come to relationships with our own baggage, our own vulnerabilities, and our own ways of processing emotions.
And that's where patience is so important, right? It's about giving your partner the space to be themselves, to figure things out without judgment.
Exactly. Relationships are a process, not a finish line. And sometimes that process requires us to slow down, listen, and offer support, especially when things get tough.
So we've delved into Venus's journey, her take on dominance, her thoughts on protection and connection. And then there's Joe with his insights on bringing empathy and understanding into relationships. But we've only scratched the surface, wouldn't you say?
Oh, for sure. There's still so much more to uncover. In the last part of our deep dive, we're going to explore some even more nuanced stuff, like Venus's reflections on her Asian upbringing, how cultural norms have shaped her, and how she's managed to challenge those expectations to create a life that feels true to her.
It's all about identity, resilience, and that constant journey of self-discovery, so stay tuned. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive. It's been a wild ride exploring the world of dominant personalities through, well, you guessed it, the Venus Look Show.
Right. Venus and Joe, I got to say, their conversation has been surprisingly relatable, even if most of us aren't, in the adult film industry.
It really has.
They just hit on these universal things about how we connect with each other, that need for control, that desire to let go and be vulnerable, how those two things kind of battle it out in our relationships.
It's like they're holding up a mirror to all of us, making us think, okay, how do I approach intimacy? What about power dynamics? And what does it really mean to connect with someone on a deeper level?
Deep stuff.
It is. So as we wrap this up, I'm curious, what's been the biggest takeaway for you from their whole back and forth?
I think for me, it's the power of perspective, like how much our individual viewpoints shape how we see the world. Venus and Joe, they keep coming back to these same themes, right? Relationships, intimacy, gender roles.
Right.
But they approach them from totally different angles. Their experiences have shaped their views in such different ways.
I see what you mean. Venus, with her history of abuse and the whole, high-stakes world she works in, she's got this ingrained need to protect herself. It's like she's always on high alert, looking for threats, calculating risks.
Always got to be one step ahead.
Yeah. Building up those walls to keep herself safe.
And that whole Darwinism thing she keeps mentioning, it shows just how deeply rooted that survival mentality is for her. She's literally applying those principles of natural selection to her relationships. Like, will this help me survive or will this hurt me?
But then you've got Joe on the other side, acknowledging those harsh realities, but offering a different perspective, one that's all about empathy, patience, and this belief that genuine connection is possible even when things are tough.
He's like, hey, it doesn't have to be a power struggle all the time.
Right, and what I find so interesting is that Venus, even though she starts off skeptical, you can tell she's genuinely considering his point of view.
Oh, yeah. She's engaged.
She's asking questions, pushing back a little, but always with this sense of like, maybe there's something to this.
It's not about him changing her mind or telling her what to do. It's a real exchange of ideas. And that's how they both learn and grow from each other.
It's like they're both holding pieces of the puzzle, and through their conversation, they start to see how those pieces fit together. And this isn't just about them, right? It's something we can all take away from this.
For sure. Whether it's with our partners, our friends, our families, even at work, seeking out different perspectives can be so valuable. It's in those tough conversations when our beliefs are challenged, that's where the real growth happens.
And it brings us to this really profound realization, I think. If our personalities are shaped by our experiences, like we've seen with Venus, then we have a choice in how those experiences define us.
Right, we have agency.
We can let those experiences build walls around us, make us approach relationships with fear and distrust, or we can use them as opportunities to grow, to learn, to become more open and compassionate.
It's about being proactive, right? Seeking out different perspectives, allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, and opening ourselves up to the possibility of truly connecting with others on a deeper level.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And I think it sums up what we've been exploring in this whole deep dive. The fact that our personalities are always evolving, that human connection is complex, and that embracing different perspectives can be incredibly transformative.
So much to think about.
There is. To everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this journey into the world of dominant personalities.
We hope this has sparked some new ideas, challenged some old beliefs, and maybe even encouraged you to have those tough but ultimately rewarding conversations with the people in your life.
Nice, Bob.
Facing.